Attics are one of those places in houses where secrets are often kept, but sometimes those secrets aren't even known to the people living in the home. From ghostly entities to very real, living threats, these are evil demons who are caught living in the attic. The Scole Experiments were a series of seances carried out by a group of so-called mediums and paranormal investigators. The experiments took place in a small village called Scole in Norfolk, England, from 1992 to 1998. The whole thing was a big deal, at least to people who are interested in this sort of thing, because 6 years worth of paranormal experiments, that's a good chunk of time, and there was some spooky stuff that went on. During the sessions, participants reported all sorts of bizarre stuff happening, from objects moving on their own to mysterious lights and sounds, but it's attics we're talking about today. And people involved in the experiments said they felt an eerie, oppressive atmosphere when they were near certain attic spaces. Yes, there were multiple cases of strange things going on in attics. There were some reports of mediums just sensing dark auras coming from these spaces, but attics are usually creepy anyway, so that's not really all that surprising. But some even claimed they saw shadowy figures manifest. In one case in '96, thumps were heard coming from the attic of a home, clear, loud, rhythmic thumps, but once they went up there, they couldn't find anything. From Reddit user Eldritch Land comes the tale of the Attic Man. In 2005, my family moved from the home that I grew up in. The house that we moved to was a former daycare and has a very odd layout. When we moved in, my brother and his small family, wife, son, and daughter, moved in with us. When my nephew was old enough to talk coherently and my niece was learning her words, they began to wake up in the night screaming and crying. My sister-in-law told us that they were having nightmares. My nephew said that there was a person watching them from the open door. He didn't like to talk about it very much, so I was asked to play some games with him and try to get some details. I eventually got a brief description. He had no eyes, black like a shadow, and moved on all fours like a dog. During summer, I got into the habit of staying up late, hanging out with friends online, and it was at this time that I started to notice some sounds. A bump on a wall or a loud step. I heard it from the attic door, which is in the hall ceiling. It was poorly constructed up there and had 2 families worth of belongings, so falling objects is not out of the question, but this continued for years, with my niece saying that she was scared of the dark man watching her. It increased in intensity, with them freaking out individually in separate rooms independently of each other, even during the day. Our German shepherds would guard them ferociously and growl at doorways from time to time. Eventually, my brother and his family moved out, and it all seemed to come to an end. Years later, my sister, still living with us, had a daughter. Last year, she began to draw pictures, and when she was asked to draw me, she drew me, but with an extra. She drew a tall, long-limbed figure, all black with no eyes, just behind me. When I asked why, she said it was because he was always watching me and following me, that he crawled from the attic and into my bedroom, and that he watched me from the cracks of doors. The Theodore Edward Coneys case. So forget things going bump in the night for a minute. This is a truly chilling case from 1941 that ended in death. Theodore Edward Coneys was a drifter and a vagrant who, desperate for shelter, ended up squatting in the attic of a man named Philip Peters in Denver. Peters was just an ordinary guy living alone, and Coneys managed to stay hidden by scavenging for food from the kitchen and sneaking out at night while Peters was asleep. But as time went on, Coneys' mental state began to deteriorate. He started getting paranoid, convinced that Peters was onto him. The idea of being discovered seemed to drive him mad, and on a dark night in March of 1941, Coneys decided he couldn't live like this anymore, and instead of just leaving, he hatched a plan to deal with Peters permanently. That night, Coneys came down from the attic and attacked Peters. The attack was brutal and vicious, and Coney ended up taking Peter's life. Being attacked by someone in the middle of the night in your own home, I mean, that's scary enough on its own, but someone coming down from the attic, having been living up there for this extended period of time, right under your nose, or I guess in this case, above it, that is much creepier. From Reddit user Throwaway1941-029 comes the story of the man in the attic. So, I have a very small bungalow. In this bungalow, I have an attic area. At a guess, I'd say about 5 by 5 meters in size, and you can only really stand in there in the very center. I work the night shift at a factory, so I usually get home around 8 a.m. Last Thursday, I got into the house and just went to sleep. I woke up to a notification on my phone that I'd missed. I have a Ring camera outside my door, which shows me anyone who would have come to my room. I saw that it had been tripped at 7:42 a.m. I got into the house around 8. I checked the video and saw that it was a man who's pressed right up to the door and was fumbling around with the handle. He did this for about 10 seconds until he spotted the camera. Once he did, he very quickly scuttled away. This unsettled me, but didn't entirely creep me out or anything. I got up to make some food and discovered something in my kitchen. My back window was open. I, of course, instantly began having the thoughts of a home intruder, but slowly chilled out as I convinced myself I had left it open. The rest of the day consisted of noticing small things that didn't seem right and scaring myself. All up until a point I spotted something that made my heart leap into my throat. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see it. My attic entrance was slowly being slid open. I can so vividly remember that I began questioning my sanity. Surely I was just hallucinating or something. Then I saw fingers wrap around the hatch and begin moving it more. I began dialing 999 and ran to my bedroom where I could lock the door. I looked down the corridor and watched for a second, seeing only a little slice of the blackness up in my attic. I saw the human hand still holding on to the slides of my ceiling. I yelled, "Whoever is there, I am calling the police and I have a firearm." The adrenaline was really making my hands and voice shake, but I tried sounding as tough as I could. Then I saw something that I truly do not think I will ever forget. The hand slipped back into the dark and then dropped down. I slammed my door shut, locked it as quickly as I could. The call went through and I was able to get online with the police. I heard the man walking up to my door and rattling the door handle. I would have just left the house, but he stayed right up until the police came and arrested him. He was a homeless man and was armed with a blade from my kitchen and had recently been seen in the area trying to get into other people's houses. In 2012 in South Carolina, a woman named Tracy discovered something truly horrifying when she found out her ex-boyfriend had been secretly living in her attic for about 2 weeks. She'd been hearing strange noises and noticing nails popping out of her attic. At first, she actually thought she was dealing with a poltergeist, but in reality, it was much more disturbing. Her sons and nephew eventually found the man hiding in the back of the attic. He'd been there since his release from prison, and it turns out he'd been keeping tabs on her from above. He'd also made quite a mess up there. There were a bunch of large cups from Sonic, each filled with waste, numbers 1 and 2. To top it off, he'd rigged the ceiling vents above Tracy's room so he could spy on her. Tracy had broken up with this guy over a decade before and had no intention of rekindling their relationship. Gotta imagine, especially not after this. She thought he'd moved to Charlotte after his latest arrest, so finding him living in her attic was the last thing she'd been expecting. I mean, as I said, to her, a poltergeist was more probable. After he bolted from the attic, the police were called, but at the time this story came out, he was still at large, and he might still be. If anyone wants to look more into this, give a little update in the comments, please do. And sticking with creepy exes, let's talk about the case of Miguel Lua. In December 2010 in Modesto, California, a woman who wished to keep her identity secret started to get anxious because strange things were happening in her house, and she was convinced her ex-boyfriend Miguel Lua was behind it. She constantly felt paranoid, and her suspicions only grew when she realized her cell phone had gone missing after she knew for a fact that she plugged it in to charge it overnight. Thinking her ex might be involved, she called the police. They came over and started searching the house, and sure enough, they found Lua hiding in the attic under some insulation. It turns out he'd been spying on her for a while. He took the cell phone to check if she was calling other guys. When the police arrested Lua, they found out that this wasn't his first offense either. Back in July of 2010, he was arrested for a similar crime against another ex-girlfriend who had 2 restraining orders against him. When a Redditor asked users what the creepiest thing they ever found in their attic was, user The Lonely Strag commented, "Me and my friend went to the attic at my new place to put some stuff up there, and there's this little door that has a small area big enough for a small person. It was meant for extra space, but inside we found a dead rat and candles and a semi-finished pentagram inside it, and after I left, I come to find out someone had taken their own life in that house. End of post. Short little story, but creepy all the same. Would you end up staying at a house where a satanic ritual, or possibly more than one satanic ritual, took place in the attic? I think with the current housing market, I'd probably just take whatever I can get, but share your thoughts down below. It's March of 2023 in Mill Creek, Washington. A homeowner starts noticing some weird things happening around the house, little stuff going missing, and this persistent smell of cigarette smoke. After some investigating, he traces the smell to an upstairs loft, and that's where things get really creepy. When he checks out the loft, he finds a makeshift bed, leftover food, illicit substance paraphernalia, and a heater that's been cranked to the top. Someone had set up a whole little hideout right there in his attic. Naturally, the homeowner freaks out, calls the police. The officers come by, clear out the stuff from the loft, but the intruder is nowhere to be found. But hold on, gets even crazier. The very next day, the homeowner has a new problem. He finds himself locked out of his own house. Calls the police again, and this time they find 24-year-old Daniel Tomoiga inside the house. Not only was Tomoiga still there, but he had also helped himself to over $3,000 in cash, a passport, and a wallet, all stolen from the homeowner. To top it off, he had some pretty serious illicit substances with him. It took the cops about an hour and a half to get Tomoiga out of the house, but he was eventually arrested and hit with charges for second-degree theft, residential burglary, and possession. Now, calling this guy evil is a real stretch, but I mean, who knows what could have happened if these two had run into each other in the house. Things may have gone a lot differently. With all that said, folks, make sure to check your attics. I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the very next video.